When my mother handed over the $45,000 cashier's check, the exact fund meant for my wedding to my sister for a down payment on a luxury condo, she didn't even have the decency to look me in the eye. I didn't cry. I took action. 72 hours later, their carefully constructed financial reality collapsed entirely, and they never saw it coming. My sister, Chloe, was the golden child. I don't use that term lightly. In our family, the hierarchy was established so early and so thoroughly that it felt less like a dynamic and more like an indisputable law of physics. Gravity pulls objects downward. My mother, Helen, pulled all resources, affection, and grace toward Chloe. If I got a B on a test, it was a sign of lazy study habits and a doomed future. If Chloe failed a class, the teacher was incompetent, the curriculum was flawed, and the school system had fundamentally failed her brilliant, misunderstood mind. For 28 years, I was the designated shock absorber for our family's dysfunction. I swallowed the slights. I absorbed the quiet, cutting remarks about my weight, my career choices, and my frankly unremarkable fiancé, Mark. Mark is a high school math teacher, a kind, steady man who actually listens when people speak. He knows my coffee order, he knows when I'm faking a smile, and he never once made me feel like I was hard to love. To my mother, who valued flash over substance and treated relationships like public relations campaigns, he was a staggering disappointment. Chloe, meanwhile, was engaged to a man who drove a leased BMW and worked in crypto consulting, a title that seemed to require a lot of midday drinking and very little actual consulting. The money in question wasn't a gift from my mother. It was from my paternal grandfather. When he passed away, he left $45,000 each to Chloe and me. I was 22 at the time, still finishing my master's degree, and entirely susceptible to my mother's particular brand of manipulation. She sat me down at the kitchen table, poured me a cup of tea, and told me how worried she was. "You're so young," she had murmured, patting my hand with feigned maternal anxiety. "I just don't want you to blow this on something foolish. Let's put it in a joint high-yield savings account. I'll manage it, keep it safe, and when you're ready to buy a house or pay for a wedding, it will be right there." It sounded reasonable. It sounded like love. I signed the paperwork. Chloe, naturally, demanded her money immediately and blew through it in less than 3 years on designer bags, trips to Chilum, and funding her fiancé's failed startup ventures. I didn't touch mine. I let it sit, gathering interest, treating it as the bedrock of the future Mark and I were building. When Mark proposed, we decided to use that money to fund a modest, elegant wedding and put the remaining $30,000 toward a down payment on our own home. The afternoon everything shattered was a dreary Tuesday in late October. I had stopped by my mother's house to show her the floral samples for the reception. I walked in through the back door, just in time to hear the tail end of a conversation in the dining room. Chloe was crying. Not real tears, but that calculated, breathy whimpering she used whenever she needed a bailout. "It's just not fair, Mom," Chloe was sighing. "The closing is on Friday. If we don't have the 45 grand, we lose the condo, and we lose the earnest money. What are we supposed to do? Live in an apartment like college students?" Then my mother's voice. Soothing. Churring. "SHHH. Don't worry, sweetheart. I've already taken care of it. I went to the bank this morning." I stepped into the doorway. On the polished mahogany table sat a blue bank folder. Next to it, a cashier's check. I recognized the bank logo. I recognized the amount. My blood ran cold. "Mom," I said, my voice eerily calm. She jumped, startled, her hand instinctively moving to cover the check. But it was too late. I walked over, pulled her hand away, and looked at the payee. It was made out to the title company handling Chloe's condo. "That's my money," I said. It wasn't a question. My mother sighed, an irritated, put-upon sound, as if I had just spilled milk on a rug. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she snapped. "You don't need a lavish wedding. You and Mark are perfectly suited for a backyard barbecue. Chloe is about to lose her dream home. She needs this. Family helps family. You can save up for your wedding on your own." She had drained the joint account. The entire $45,000. Because my name was on it, but so was hers, it was perfectly legal for her to walk into the branch and request a cashier's check. She had stolen my future to subsidize her favorite daughter's present. The sheer audacity of it hung in the air. She wasn't asking for my permission, she was informing me of my sacrifice. This is how gaslighting operates in a family system. It's not just about denying reality, it's about reframing abuse as a moral obligation. If I objected, I was being selfish. If I demanded my own money, I was ruining my sister's life. She had built a psychological trap where the only way to be a good daughter was to let myself be actively robbed. I looked at Chloe. She wasn't crying anymore. She was looking down at her phone, casually scrolling, a tiny, satisfied smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. She didn't even have the courage to gloat to my face. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I let out a short, humorless laugh. I realized in that exact moment something profoundly clarifying. Keeping the peace is just slow self-destruction with a polite name. For years, I had confused my silence with strength. I thought that by absorbing their selfishness, I was holding the family together. But in narcissistic family systems, empathy isn't a virtue, it's a vulnerability. It's a currency they extract from you to fund their own comfort. When you are the scapegoat, your sacrifices aren't appreciated, they are expected. And the moment you stop offering yourself up to be burned, you are the villain. The guilt they try to make you feel is just the shadow of their own shame, projected onto you so they don't have to carry it themselves. I slowly turned around, picked up the bag of floral samples, and walked out the door without another word. I walked to my car, the gravel crunching under my boots, the crisp autumn air filling my lungs. I could hear my mother scoff behind me, already spinning the narrative of my immaturity. What she didn't realize as she sat there feeling victorious was that the joint account wasn't the only piece of paper with both of our names on it, and what I was about to do next would leave her with absolutely nothing. That was the moment the illusion of family completely evaporated, and this is where I stopped making excuses for them and started doing the math. Driving home, my vision was terrifyingly clear. I pulled into my driveway, walked into the kitchen, and found Mark grading papers. I laid the situation out for him, fact by cold fact. He set his pen down, took off his glasses, and asked me exactly one question. What do you want to do? Not are you okay? Not maybe we should talk to her. He knew the invisible line had been irreversibly crossed. I want my future back, I told him quietly, and I want her to pay for it. To understand how I was about to dismantle my mother's reality, you must understand a legal maneuver she executed 6 years ago. She had always lived recklessly beyond her means. 6 years prior, she caused a major car accident while underinsured, and the other driver sued her for a devastating amount. Panicking that she would lose her prized 4-bedroom colonial home in the judgment, she dragged me to a notary public. She executed a quitclaim deed, transferring the ownership of her house entirely to my name. Just to protect the asset she had claimed, treating it like a clever tax loophole. I'll put it back in my name when the lawsuit blows over. The lawsuit eventually settled within her insurance limits, but my mother, notoriously cheap when it came to attorney fees, never bothered to reverse the deed. She assumed I was too docile to ever use it against her. She was legally a tenant in my house, paying the property taxes and utilities in my name, while I held the absolute, uncontested title. I didn't know it then, but what I pulled out of my fireproof lockbox that afternoon changed the trajectory of our lives forever. It was the original stamp deed. I held the heavy paper in my hands, realizing it was the ultimate leverage. But I needed it to be legally bulletproof. I called a real estate attorney named David Sterling, a former college roommate of Mark's. I wanted a cinematic moment where he picked up on the first ring. Instead, his paralegal told me he was in court. I sat at my kitchen island for 4 agonizing hours, staring at a cold cup of coffee, my knee bouncing nervously as adrenaline slowly turned into a sick, acidic dread in my stomach. When David finally returned my call, I explained the situation. He asked me to scan and email the deed, along with the bank statement showing the withdrawal of my wedding funds. She legally stole $45,000, David said over the speakerphone, his voice dry and professional. But because it was a joint account, the police will tell you it's a civil matter. You could sue, but it would take years. The house, however, that's a different story. You own it free and clear. There is no lease agreement. Legally, she is an at-will tenant in your property. If I can offer one crucial piece of clarity right now, A document signed before a conflict is basic self-preservation. People often assume financial abuse only looks like a spouse controlling your paycheck, but it is deeply pervasive in toxic family dynamics. Financial abuse is still abuse, and the beautiful thing about money is that it leaves a meticulous paper trail. Building a paper trail isn't an act of paranoia, it is a shield. A paper trail does not care about your mother's tears, your sister's entitlement, or family loyalty. It only cares about ink, dates, and notary stamps. David and I formulated a surgical plan. I was going to sell the house. I had absolutely no intention of keeping a property tainted by her presence. I instructed David to draft a formal notice to quit, giving her the minimum legal requirement of 30 days to vacate the premises before formal eviction proceedings began. Simultaneously, I reached out to a Cash for Homes real estate investor. They buy properties as is, closing in a matter of days. They wouldn't give me true market value, but I didn't care about maximizing profit. I cared about speed, and I wanted her out. While I was coordinating with the investor, the smear campaign predictably began. My phone started vibrating constantly on Wednesday morning. Chloe had taken to Facebook, posting a lengthy, dramatic status update about how some people are so consumed by jealousy they try to ruin their own siblings' milestones. She publicly claimed I had thrown a psychotic tantrum over her new condo because my own life was pathetic. Extended family members flooded the comments, calling me a brat and a disappointment. I didn't try to defend myself to anyone. I didn't reply to a single comment. I simply took detailed screenshots of every single venomous message my mother sent me calling me a greedy, ungrateful mistake, and I archived them. I was no longer interested in defending my character to people who were entirely committed to misunderstanding me. By Thursday afternoon, the investor had completed a drive-by appraisal and agreed to purchase the home for $400,000 cash, contingent on it being delivered vacant. I signed the preliminary purchase agreement electronically. David finalized the eviction notice and hired a private process server. My mother and sister honestly thought they had won. They assumed my silence meant I had retreated into submission, just as I had done 1,000 times before. They were busy coordinating the movers for Chloe's luxury condo, entirely oblivious to the legal machinery grinding away directly beneath their feet. I packed my bags for a quiet weekend trip Mark and I had planned, ensuring we would be entirely out of the blast radius when the detonation occurred. Everything was set for Friday evening, exactly 1 hour before Chloe's extravagant housewarming dinner, a lavish celebration they were happily funding with my stolen future. That was the setup. Now here's where I stopped being patient and started being precise. The housewarming dinner for Chloe's new condo was in full swing by the time Mark parked our packed car across the street. The building was modern, but the security call box was completely malfunctioning. A resident finally let me slip in behind them, which cost me 5 minutes of standing in the freezing rain, my hair damp and my pulse pounding. I thought I was ready for that moment. I wasn't, not entirely. But I rode the elevator up to the penthouse floor anyway, clutching a crisp manila envelope. I opened the heavy door and stepped into the sprawling, open-concept living area. It was swarming with our extended family, all sipping expensive champagne and admiring the floor-to-ceiling windows. My mother spotted me from across the kitchen island, her eyes flashing with a mix of triumph and malice. "Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence," she announced loudly, ensuring every conversation in the room abruptly died. "Did you finally realize that throwing a tantrum wasn't going to get you anywhere? Or did you just come to enjoy the free catering? Chloe worked incredibly hard for this home, so please try not to ruin her special night with your bitter jealousy." I didn't flinch, and I kept my voice steady as I stepped fully into the center of the room. "I didn't come for the catering, Mom," I said, holding her gaze. "I came to drop off your copy of the paperwork since the process server couldn't find you at home." I unclasped the envelope and laid the documents flat on the marble counter. First, the original quitclaim deed bearing her signature. Second, the preliminary cash purchase agreement for $400,000. And finally, the formal 30-day notice to quit, officially stamped, legally severing her right to the property. My mother snatched the papers, her smug smile completely evaporating as her eyes darted across the dense legal jargon. She read the eviction notice once, then traced back to the top to read it a second time. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out, as the terrifying reality of the asset transfer she had long forgotten finally crushed the air from her lungs. She didn't scream, she didn't attack me, and she didn't launch into her usual theatrical hysterics. She just stood there, paralyzed, the thick parchment paper rattling violently in her hands. The clinking of glasses ceased entirely, and the room went dead silent as my aunts and uncles stared in stunned shock. "You have exactly 30 days to vacate my house. You can't do this," my mother finally choked out, the color rapidly draining from her face. Their faces went pale all around the room. "That's my home. I pay the taxes." "You pay the taxes on a property titled entirely in my name," I corrected her, my tone devoid of emotion. "You gave me the house 6 years ago to hide it from a lawsuit. It's legally mine. And I just sold it to and as his cash buyer. The closing is in 2 weeks. Whatever furniture you leave behind will be thrown in a dumpster." Chloe pushed her way to the front of the crowd, her designer dress swishing. "You're making Mom homeless? Because of a stupid wedding fund? You are an absolute monster." "She's not homeless," I replied calmly, picking up my purse. "She has $45,000 of my money. I'm sure she can use that for a security deposit on an apartment. Or better yet, Chloe, she can live here. After all, she bought this condo for you." I watched the exact moment the trap clamped shut on the golden child. Chloe's eyes widened in genuine horror, and she took a physical step back from our mother. "Move in here?" No, Mom, you can't move in here. Liam needs the guest room for his crypto mining servers. You absolutely cannot live with us." My mother whipped her head toward her favorite daughter, genuine betrayal flashing across her features. "Chloe, please, I have nowhere else to go. I did this for you. I paid for this. I didn't ask you to steal her money." Chloe shrieked, instantly rewriting history to save herself from the burden of our mother. "This is your fault." Watching them immediately turn on each other was deeply sobering. Boundaries are simply a description of what you will and will not accept in your life. Enforcing them is not an act of cruelty, it is the ultimate act of clarity. You cannot reason with someone who benefits from misunderstanding you. In toxic family systems, people who scream the loudest about loyalty have almost always done the least to actually earn it. When they pushed me to the absolute edge, I realized that no contact is not a dramatic tantrum. It is a necessary medical decision for your own mental survival. Leaving quietly, legally, and permanently is the most powerful thing you can do to someone who relies on your compliance. I didn't stay to watch the rest of the argument. I turned on my heel and walked out the door, leaving the two of them screaming at each other in front of 30 silent guests. I took the stairs back down to the street and got into Mark's car. He didn't ask how it went. He just squeezed my hand, put the car in drive, and we headed toward the mountains. The air in the car felt lighter than it had in 28 years. My phone started ringing endlessly, lighting up the console with my mother's face, then Chloe's. I rolled down the window, let the cool night air hit my face, and turned the device completely off. That should have been the end of the story. But I didn't know it then, sitting in the passenger seat of that car, that the real damage was just about to begin. Walking out of that room felt like victory. But the next 72 hours taught me what victory actually costs. I thought the worst was behind me. I was wrong because a cornered narcissist, stripped of their narrative control, is the most dangerous version of themselves. My mother did not go quietly into the night, nor did she accept her new reality with a shred of dignity. Instead, she unleashed a frantic, scorched-earth legal and social campaign to utterly destroy my life. She hired a belligerent, discount attorney to file an emergency injunction to stop the sale of the house. They claimed elder abuse, fraud, and severe emotional distress. It wasn't entirely smooth sailing for me. The injunction temporarily froze the title transfer, delaying the closing by 9 stressful days and costing me an additional $2,000 in retaining fees for David. I spent 3 sleepless nights pacing the hardwood floors, wondering if the cash investor would walk away from the deal entirely because of the legal friction. I felt that familiar, suffocating panic creeping back in the voice in my head that sounded exactly like my mother, telling me I was foolish to ever fight back. But when the emergency hearing finally took place over a Zoom call, David dismantled her entire case in less than 14 minutes. The judge took one look at the legally binding quitclaim deed, noted the complete absence of any written lease or financial agreement, and dismissed her motion with prejudice. The gavel fell and her last desperate attempt at control shattered. She was legally out of options, but she still refused to pack. She honestly believed that, deep down, the old me would resurface and stop the clock. She thought I would blink. I didn't blink. On day 31, the sheriff arrived at the property to execute the formal eviction order. It was a humiliating, public spectacle right in the middle of her pristine suburban neighborhood. She was forced to hire an emergency, same-day moving company at extortionate, premium rates just to get her belongings out before the locks were changed. They dumped her prized mahogany dining set, her crystal chandeliers, and her antique Persian rugs into a cramped, poorly lit two-bedroom apartment on the industrial outskirts of 2WN. Securing that last-minute lease, paying double security deposits due to her absolute lack of recent rental history, and covering the emergency movers completely vaporized the $45,000 she had stolen from my wedding fund. The money was gone, vanished into thin air, and she had absolutely nothing to show for it except a drastically downgraded life and a shattered reputation. Meanwhile, the collateral damage hit Chloe with devastating precision. With my mother financially crippled, the Bank of Mom was permanently and irrevocably closed. She could no longer subsidize Chloe's lavish lifestyle, pay her escalating credit card bills, or cover the massive, non-negotiable HOA fees on the new luxury condo. When Liam, the crypto consultant fiancé, realized his golden goose was officially cooked and there would be no more inherited wealth to casually fund his failing ventures, his loyalty evaporated over a single weekend. He packed his leased BMW while Chloe was getting a blowout at the salon, left a cowardly post-it note on the kitchen island, and drove out of state. He left her holding the crushing mortgage on a penthouse she couldn't possibly afford on her own part-time salary. Within 4 months, the condo would go into pre-foreclosure, a stark monument to their collective arrogance. I watched their lives completely unravel from a safe distance, but the strangest thing happened. I felt an overwhelming, almost physical urge to step in and save them. I need you to listen closely to this, because this is the insidious nature of trauma bonding, and it explains exactly why we stay so fiercely loyal to those who relentlessly hurt you. When you are raised in a cycle of emotional abuse and intermittent reward, your brain literally wires itself to seek comfort from the exact same source that causes your pain. You become deeply addicted to the microscopic breadcrumbs of affection they drop only after they have starved you of all validation. I had to physically grip the edge of my kitchen counter to stop my hands from shaking, fighting the instinct to call my mother and offer to pay her first month's rent. The bond isn't built on love, it is built entirely on survival. Breaking a trauma bond feels exactly like betraying your own family, because the narcissist has spent your entire life training you to believe that your only value in this world is your utility to them. It takes a terrifying, exhausting amount of willpower to sit on your hands and let them face the brutal consequences of their own actions without throwing yourself onto the tracks. To stop the train. The angry text messages from our extended family poured in for weeks, calling me a monster and a ruthless traitor. But sitting in my quiet, peaceful kitchen with Mark, I finally understood the profound, life-altering difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is the feeling that you did something wrong. It is a healthy, internal compass that tells you when your actions do not align with your core morals. But shame? Shame is the toxic, suffocating weight they force you to carry, the deep, paralyzing belief that you are fundamentally wrong. My mother didn't want me to feel guilty, she wanted me to feel ashamed of existing outside of her total control. She weaponized the concept of a good daughter to keep me tethered to her dysfunction. Once you realize that the shame they make you feel is just a desperate projection of their own failures, you can finally stop carrying their luggage. I did not do a single thing wrong by taking back my own property. I was not a bad daughter for refusing to fund my sister's outrageous entitlement. I finally put their shame down on the floor, stepped over it, and for the first time in my life, my hands were entirely my own. I had survived the legal battles, the smear campaign, and the eviction. I had built an ironclad paper trail and executed a flawless exit strategy. But what I found inside my mailbox 3 weeks later proved that my mother still had one final, devastating card left to play. The envelope was from a third-party collections agency I had never heard of. Inside was a final demand notice for a Visa signature card, carrying a balance of exactly $18,422. The name on the account was mine. The billing address, however, was my mother's former colonial home. I sat at my kitchen island, the same place I had sat when I first called my attorney, feeling a different kind of cold wash over me. She hadn't just drained my wedding fund, she had been quietly cannibalizing my credit for years. The dates on the statements aligned perfectly with Chloe's extravagant destination, bachelorette party in Shalom, and the down payment on her leased BMW. When my mother was forcibly evicted, the statement stopped finding her, and the account went into immediate default. This is where the reality of untangling yourself from financial abuse loses its cinematic shine. There was no instant, dramatic confrontation this time. There was only exhausting, bureaucratic friction. I spent 3 hours the next morning on hold with the bank's fraud department. The connection kept buffering, and the representative was deeply skeptical. Because the billing address matched my historical residence, they treated me not as a victim of identity theft, but as a delinquent borrower experiencing buyer's remorse. "Are you absolutely certain you didn't authorize a family member to use this card?" the fraud agent asked, her voice tripping with corporate exhaustion. I kept my voice steady, though my hands were shaking. "I am absolutely certain. I have never seen this card, and I did not authorize those charges." The bank agent informed me that to waive the debt and clear my credit profile, I couldn't just dispute it verbally over the phone. I had to file a formal police report for identity theft and submit a sworn affidavit. I drove to the local precinct that afternoon. Sitting in that sterile, fluorescent-lit waiting room for 40 minutes, surrounded by scuffed linoleum and the smell of stale coffee, I felt the last lingering threads of my trauma. A bond permanently snapped. Filing a police report meant crossing the Rubicon. It meant taking this out of the realm of civil family disputes and squarely into criminal territory. My mother would be investigated for felony fraud. When the detective finally called me back, I handed him the collection notice, the bank statements my attorney had subpoenaed, and the eviction paperwork proving she had exclusively occupied the address where the car was registered. He looked over the documents, sighed a heavy breath, and started typing. A week later, 2 uniformed officers knocked on the door of my mother's cramped new apartment. I wasn't there to see it, but my aunt, who had finally stopped calling me a monster and started realizing the terrifying depth of my mother's lies, gave me the detailed play-by-plot. Why? My mother was brought in for formal questioning. The sheer humiliation of being escorted into a police cruiser in broad daylight, right in front of her new neighbors, completely broke her. She finally confessed to the detective, sobbing that she only did it because she was under so much stress trying to provide for her girls. She desperately tried to frame a felony identity theft as an act of maternal sacrifice. The bank closed the fraudulent account and wiped the massive debt from my credit profile. Because she was a first-time offender and the amount fell just below a certain federal threshold, the district attorney offered her a plea deal. She avoided actual jail time, but she was hit with 3 years of strict probation, mandatory restitution to the bank, and a permanent felony record that instantly destroyed her low-NG standing career as a regional bank manager. She was fired the following Monday, stripped of her pension and her professional dignity. I want to talk about a phrase that keeps so many people trapped in endless cycles of profound abuse: keeping it in the family. We are heavily conditioned to believe that family secrets are sacred, and that involving outside authorities, lawyers, police, therapists is the ultimate betrayal. But the real cost of keeping it in the family is that the abuser is entirely protected from consequences, while the victim is slowly consumed. They rely entirely on your silence to maintain their public facade. When they tell you not to air dirty laundry, what they are really demanding is absolute immunity from the consequences of their own actions. You do not owe secrecy to the people who are quietly destroying you. Exposing the truth is not an act of revenge. It is an act of basic survival. If their reputation is destroyed by the truth, then their reputation was built on a lie to begin with. Mark and I got married 6 months later. We didn't have the grand, lavish wedding we had originally planned with the $45,000. Instead, we used a portion of the $400,000 I made from selling the colonial home to host an intimate, beautiful ceremony on a cliffside overlooking the ocean. There were only 30 guests. There were no fake smiles, no whispered criticisms about the floral arrangements, and absolutely no anxiety about who was going to throw a tantrum. My mother was not invited. Chloe was not invited. We were surrounded entirely by people who brought us authentic peace. Sometimes, extended relatives ask me if I feel any regret when the holidays roll around. They wonder if my heart softens when I think of my mother sitting in a tiny apartment, stripped of her wealth, her career, and her favorite child, who still bitterly blames her for the loss of the luxury penthouse. I don't. Not even for a second. Leaving quietly, legally, and permanently was the most powerful thing I have ever done. I didn't destroy her life. I simply handed her the bill for the life she chose to live, and I finally stopped paying for it. So what do you think? Did I go too far or not far enough? Let me know in the comments below.